A student headed home after a night out with friends, but she never made it. At first, detectives thought that this would be a pretty straightforward case, but what happened next shocked everyone. As disturbing new details came to light, the whole of Australia was outraged, and the public's anger is still very much alive. Audrey Griffin was born in 2005 in Australia. From the time she was a kid, she was all about sports, and not just for fun. She trained hard and took it seriously. Over the years, she racked up some impressive achievements, competing in triathlons, playing rugby and water polo, and showing up to tournaments ready to win. She even flew to New Zealand for a major triathlon and finished 23rd in her age group, out of hundreds of athletes. But Audrey wasn't just about competition. She had a big group of friends who loved being around her because she was full of energy, driven, and genuinely kind. After finishing high school, she got into the University of Technology in Sydney to study marine biology. And around that same time, she started thinking about joining the military. She wanted to serve her country and make a difference, and she had her sights set on the Navy. By the time she was finishing her second year, she made the decision to enlist. She was 19 at the time, and before heading off to start her service, she wanted to spend some time with her dad and her grandparents, who lived in a small town called Arena. She also had a bunch of friends there and figured it was the perfect time to say goodbye before starting this big new chapter of her life. On March 21, 2025, Audrey spent the day with her family and paid a visit to her grandfather, who was in the hospital at the time. The next day, she met up with friends at a bar in a nearby town. They'd organized a going-away party for her since she'd soon be heading off for military service and wouldn't get to see them for a long while. Audrey had a great time, and around 2 a.m., she decided to head home. At first, she tried to call a cab, but the app couldn't find a ride. So, she figured she'd start walking towards her dad's place, planning to make it to the main road that connected a few nearby towns and try to flag down a taxi there. Audrey said goodbye to her friends and headed out. About an hour later, they tried texting and calling her to make sure she got home safe, but she didn't answer. They started to worry, but told themselves she probably just made it back and went to bed. The next morning, Audrey's mom woke up and immediately checked her daughter's location using a smartphone app. She was in Sydney at the time, but she knew Audrey had been out late and just wanted to make sure she got home safely. But when she opened the app, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Audrey's phone was still showing as being near a river that ran through town, nowhere near her dad's house. Worried, she called Audrey's dad, who said she never came home that night. He added that Audrey had mentioned she might crash at a friend's place, so they called that friend next, but she hadn't seen her either. Realizing something was wrong, Audrey's friends called the police and headed to the river where her phone was last pinged. They walked along the shoreline and eventually came across her purse and a hair clip. Right around that same time, police officers arrived at the scene, along with Audrey's father. When they spotted her belongings, they kept searching the riverbank. Then, someone noticed something floating in the water, and as they got closer, it became heartbreakingly clear. It was Audrey. Police turned Audrey's body over to the medical examiner, and the initial conclusion was that she had drowned. Investigators believed it must have been some kind of tragic accident. Maybe she slipped and fell into the water in the dark and wasn't able to get out. Given how late it was and the fact that she'd been walking along a mostly deserted stretch of road, the theory seemed plausible to them. But Audrey's family and friends absolutely refused to believe that. Her mother said Audrey hadn't been drinking that night and the idea that she could drown in a shallow river just didn't make sense. Audrey had been swimming for years, even in the ocean with strong waves, and she never had any problems. And then there were a few more things that didn't sit right, like the marks under her fingernails and that her jacket had been torn. Despite all of that, police continued to treat Audrey's death as nothing more than a tragic accident. Over the next several days, her parents waited for some kind of update, or at least a sign that detectives were actively working the case. But nothing happened. Her death didn't even make the local news at first, and only a few media outlets picked up the story days later. Audrey's family and friends couldn't just sit around doing nothing. They kept returning to the river, hoping they'd spot something that might help explain what happened. 3 days after her death, a friend of Audrey's mom found her phone, half buried in the mud near a tree. It was just lying there, in plain sight. Her parents were furious. The fact that police hadn't even done a thorough search of the area made things feel even worse. After that, Audrey's mom decided to take matters into her own hands. She started visiting every business along the road where Audrey had walked that night. And surprisingly, not a single one of them had been contacted by police, not even for a routine interview. Unfortunately, none of them had any useful information to offer, so once again, Audrey's family was left with nothing. Weeks went by, and all that time, Audrey's family kept pushing the police to take the case seriously. Eventually, detectives agreed to open a full investigation, and on April 17th, almost a month after Audrey's death, something unexpected happened. Police put out a public request for help identifying a man who had been spotted on surveillance footage along Audrey's route that night. They clarified that he wasn't a suspect, at least not officially, but they wanted to speak with him as part of the investigation. The only problem was the footage was grainy and the man's face wasn't clearly visible, which made it hard to figure out who he was. For the next few days, there were no major updates from law enforcement. But that all changed on April 21st, when detectives suddenly announced they had made an arrest in connection with Audrey's case. They arrested a 53-year-old man named Adrian Torrens, who was found in Sydney. And that same day, he was officially charged with Audrey's murder. Once the arrest was made, police shared with the public what they had uncovered over the past few days. At first, they were leaning toward the idea that Audrey's death had been a tragic accident. But after mounting pressure from her family, detectives launched a deeper investigation. By reviewing CCTV footage along Audrey's route, they spotted a man walking several hundred yards behind her. Later, he appeared on another camera, still trailing her. Then, they spoke with a local resident who lived near the river. Around 3 a.m. that night, he heard a sharp, high-pitched scream that lasted for about a minute. At the time, he thought it might have been a wild fox, since their cries can sound eerily human. But after hearing about Audrey's death on the news and realizing the timing lined up, he began to suspect it might have actually been her. Then, police found another witness, a man who had been out walking his dog in the middle of the night. He said he had passed by some man who gave him a bad feeling. According to the witness, the guy looked really on edge, nervous and twitchy, and just came off as strange overall. When detectives got a description, they realized it matched the same man from the surveillance footage, right down to the clothes he was wearing. At that point, the theory that Audrey's death had been an accident started to fall apart. Investigators asked for a more detailed forensic analysis of her body, and that's when things really started to shift. This time, the medical examiner found multiple scratches on Audrey's arms, along with abrasions on her face that could have come from a blow. But the most important discovery was still to come. When they took samples from under her fingernails, they found skin tissue. DNA testing revealed it belonged to a man, and when they ran the sample through the criminal database, they got a hit almost instantly. The DNA matched Adrian Torrens. Based on everything they had at that point, police were now working with a completely different theory. The injuries on Audrey's body, along with Torrens' DNA under her fingernails, strongly suggested that she had fought him off and that he likely held her underwater until she lost consciousness. But even though the suspect was finally behind bars, Audrey's case was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning to gain national attention, and just a few days later, the entire country was talking about it. That's because after Torrens' arrest, disturbing details about his past came to light, and people across Australia were outraged. While Audrey's friends and loved ones were still reeling from the arrest, there was one person who wasn't surprised at all. Torrens' ex-wife, Michelle. When reporters reached out to her, Michelle said she'd been living in fear for months because Torrens had repeatedly threatened her life. The two had gotten married in 2020, and at first, he seemed like a kind, caring, and positive guy. But that changed quickly. Not long after the wedding, his behavior started to shift. According to Michelle, he would suddenly snap, flying into fits of rage and threatening her out of nowhere. It didn't take much to set him off, and she began to seriously fear that he might hurt her. By early 2024, Michelle realized she couldn't stay in the relationship any longer. That moment came when Torrens, in one of his rages, punched a hole in the wall, just inches from her face. That was the final straw. She left him and went to the police to get a restraining order. It was a full no-contact order, but within just a few weeks, Torrens had already broken it. He called her 34 times and left 24 voicemails, filled with threats, insults, and promises to kill her. He even said he was on his way to her house multiple times, so Michelle was terrified and living in constant fear. She went back to the police and they went to arrest Torrens, but for some reason, they couldn't find him for 5 whole months. And during that time, the messages and threats kept coming. That went on until January 2025, when police finally managed to track Torrens down and arrest him. It was then that Michelle learned something that left her stunned. Torrens had a long criminal history he'd never told her about. He'd been arrested for drunk driving, drug offenses, and a string of other charges. In 2019, he assaulted his girlfriend and was sentenced to 20 months in prison, but ended up only serving 4. After that, he kept racking up charges, theft, fraud, you name it. And yet, he somehow avoided any real consequences. When he was arrested in January for violating the restraining order, it looked like he might finally do time, but for some reason, the judge decided to go easy on him. Instead of sending him to jail, they gave him what was basically a slap on the wrist, a kind of probation where he was technically supposed to be supervised, but in reality, there were no real restrictions on his freedom. So, Torrens walked free, and just 3 months later, he murdered Audrey. Once that information became public, people across the country were furious. They couldn't understand how the court had let a man like that stay out of prison, essentially giving him the chance to kill a 19-year-old girl. And, to make matters worse, it took police nearly a month after Audrey's death to even start treating it as a possible homicide. Audrey's mother later revealed something else. After Torrens was arrested, one of her friends remembered seeing him at the river, at the exact spot where Audrey had died, just 5 days after the murder. He was wearing the same clothes seen in the surveillance footage from that night. But even that wasn't the end of it. Audrey's mother also said that police only began investigating after she demanded to see all the CCTV footage from her daughter's route. Only then did detectives decide to review it themselves and realize someone had been following Audrey that night. And when they finally did arrest Torrens, police managed to bungle that too. They sat down with Audrey's parents and told them that Torrens was likely the killer. Audrey's mom asked if he had done something to her daughter, and the detectives responded, "We haven't had a chance to talk to him yet, because he's asleep." As for Torrens, after his arrest, he refused to confess. But police had something close to a confession anyway. Before taking him in, they tapped his phone, and during a call with a friend, Torrens admitted to the murder. He said something inside him had just snapped, and that he had no idea why he did it. So, the prosecution had everything they needed for a conviction, but then, the case took one final unexpected turn. Just 3 days after his arrest, Torrens was found unconscious in his jail cell. He was rushed to the hospital, but didn't make it. According to early reports, he did it himself. The news hit Audrey's parents like a second tragedy. Not only had they wanted justice, they had also wanted answers. They needed to know why this man took their daughter away from them. But now, that answer died with him. Then again, based on what he told his friend, there may have never been a reason at all. Torrens was known to abuse alcohol and drugs, and he may have been completely out of his mind that night. Michelle, his ex-wife, later said he started calling her again that same evening, threatening to kill her. And just like that, the case was effectively closed, though official procedures are still ongoing to this day. Audrey's story sparked widespread outrage across the country, and for good reason. Not only had the system repeatedly allowed a dangerous man to walk free, but police took nearly a month to even begin a proper investigation. The public was also furious because Audrey was the 23rd woman killed in Australia in 2025 alone. And, while such tragedies happen with alarming frequency, people were outraged by the government's continued failure to take real action to stop them. Some steps, however, have finally been taken. A resolution named in Audrey's memory was introduced in Parliament, calling for stronger measures to prevent similar crimes. The Prime Minister also launched an investigation into the police department that handled Audrey's case, as well as the jail where Torrens died. Memorial events were held across the country, with thousands of people coming together to honor Audrey's life. One of the most powerful moments took place at the river where her body was found. People gathered and waited for a sunset, because that was Audrey's favorite time of day. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video.